Hi, and welcome to today's episode. Thank you for joining, and I hope you're looking forward to another brilliant conversation to help you build healthier habits to live a healthy, happy life. And today's topic, I think, is going to maybe create a bit of intrigue and probably open up something a bit different when it comes to your health and building a toolkit to support strong health and wellness, because today, I have with me Jill White, who's here to talk about hypnotherapy to reduce stress, overwhelm, and anxiety and build resilience. And we're going to really dive into how your brain works and why even our kids should really understand the role of our brains and how they can support themselves when it comes to stress. So it's a brilliant topic, and I know you're going to take a lot away, and probably, as they'd be quite intrigued to think, oh, how do we use hypnotherapy for something other than laughing at people when we get them to pretend they're a dog or a chicken or something? And Jill's laughing here with me. So welcome to the podcast, Jill.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name's Jill Whitehouse. Yes, it's really interesting the kind of the impression people have of hypnotherapy is that kind of game show. But yes, hopefully I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about what we do as the
Yeah,
conversation goes on.
great. So just to kick us off and find out a bit about you and your healthy lifestyle, what would you say your most impactful habit is that you use from your toolkit on a regular basis?
So I think probably the most important one for me is making sure that I'm in a good place before I do anything for anyone else. So I am very conscious of my health and my need for exercise. So every day I try to go out for a walk outside, even in the rain. The rain will not stop me, just because I know that that settles me, that sets me up for the day, and it puts me in that positive, kind of rational frame of mind that I need to be in to get everything that I need to do in the day done.
Oh, brilliant. And do you usually do that walk early in the morning before you start your working day?
I try to. I try to. That
Hmm.
doesn't always happen, but as long as I know that the walk is going to happen at some point in the day, it seems to have the same impact on me. So I usually try to get it done in the morning. But even if it's in the afternoon, I
Hmm.
know it's happening, so it keeps that kind of calm
Yeah.
going as well. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. And I'm the same. I like to try and do a short walk before work. But today we're recording this late morning. I had calls literally from first thing this morning. So I've parked my walk until lunchtime. But it's brilliant just to get outside. As you say, there's so many benefits alongside that physical movement benefit. And it's something
Absolutely.
that's free. And yeah, where I live, I'm not necessarily walking in the best of areas all of the time, but it's still outside. And so I think, regardless of whether you're in a residential area or you can easily get to the countryside, you can do it, can't you?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's kick off then with hypnotherapy, because I've made a bit of a joke there.
Yeah.
It is how people
Yeah.
usually think of it. I know when I've spoke to my daughter about it, she was quite intrigued and was like, oh, so can you literally control people and get them to do so? Yeah, what is it and how does it work, and how is it different in terms of what you do to what we've traditionally seen in the
Yeah.
entertainment world?
So hypnotherapy is really interesting because, I mean, obviously the one that I do is called solution focused hypnotherapy. So it's a talk therapy. So it's very much based on neuroscience. So it's about understanding how our brains work. And our brains are very complex. I usually kind of describe them as having those two main areas of that thinking, intellectual part, which is where we can make decisions, we can be generally positive and rational. But then we've got that emotional side of our brain, that primitive side of our brain. And this is where the amygdala is. So it's that fight, flight, or freeze. And when we are down in that emotional primitive part of our brain, we react. So it's that, if there was a polar bear in front of us, our anxiety levels would go up, our intellectual control would drop, and we'd go into that fight, flight, freeze mode. So down there in that primitive brain, we have the kind of three options of anxiety, which is that anxious, kind of sick, nervous feeling. We have depression, which is that hideaway, or we have anger. And when we are down there, we tend to go worst case scenario. So we're not going to look at the polar bear and think, oh, he's already had his tea. We're going to think, oh no, he's going to snaffle me. And what we do down there is we are obsessional because we need to be if there's danger. We're also not intellectual, so it's really hard to make rational decisions, to find solutions when we're in that kind of emotional part of our brain. So what we need to do is we need to find ways to get ourselves up into that rational thinking, intellectual brain. So what hypnotherapy does is it uses something called trance. Now, trance is completely normal. We do it all the time. When we're walking along, sometimes we're walking along a path and we think, how did we get to this point? I don't remember walking that section, or sometimes we drive home and we think, oh, well, I know I drove home safely, but I have no recollection. And what that is that's trance. So it's that really relaxed state where our kind of conscious part of our brain accesses that subconscious, all of that vast learning that we've done for the whole of our life. And when those two parts of our brains come together, we start to come up with solutions for our problems. So hypnotherapy is about talking and visualizing what we want for the future, but then giving our brains some processing time. So when we do trance, which I have to say my clients always say is the best part of the session, they absolutely love it. It's like the best power nap ever. They have this relaxation session where their brain can start to process. Their brain can start to process and work out what it needs to do to solve whichever problem. So that hypnotherapy bit, people say, oh, I don't know if I can be hypnotized. And I just laugh and I say, if you can close your eyes and listen to me, then it's all good. And that's really what it is. It's using the brain and how it works in a relaxed state.
Yeah. And that state you've described, there's I think there's three different ways you can get into that state. One is through hypnotherapy, one is just as you're going to sleep, but it's a very, very small window, isn't it? That's why, for example, years ago, and I'm talking 20 plus years ago, when I had some hypnotherapy for my anxiety, and like I say, a long time ago, so it wasn't as mainstream as it is now, she gave me a CD to listen to and put on. And she said, doesn't matter if you're not listening and you fall asleep, because it's going to work on that subconscious part of your brain as you're drifting into sleep. And then, actually, is it only those two ways? And I think the third way you can change your brain is consciously trying to do it, which obviously is where people struggle and try for years to change the way they think and those habits and so on. So is that right? Yeah, there's the two.
I would say probably the third way is just when it happens really naturally. I mean, we've all done that thing where, when you're washing the conditioner off your hair in the shower, and all of a sudden you think, oh, that's what I should have said to that person. Or, oh, I've just remembered I need to pick that parcel up from the post office. And what it is it's just our brain just drifts off. It just drifts off itself. And all of a sudden, it's solving problems that you hadn't even realized your brain was thinking about at the time. So when you're talking about the audio, so on my website, I have the audio. I give this to all my clients, but it's readily available for anyone who wants it. And the audio is what I use in the sessions. So I read out the language patterns, and the client, kind of head back, lovely and relaxed. And it's true when you fall asleep listening to it, even as you're falling asleep, your brain is still listening, but it knows it doesn't have to do anything about it. Nobody's going to ask it a question about it. It doesn't have to remember what I've said. It's just enough of a job to do to let the brain drift off and do what it needs to do. So I always say our body relaxes, our brain kicks into a higher gear.
Yeah. And so it's completely different to what they do for entertainment purposes, isn't it? That, I mean,
Yeah,
it's similar in the
yeah,
sense that it's tapping into that deeper level of your brain, your subconscious. But
yeah,
when you are working with people, this isn't about controlling their brain and their thoughts and planting
absolutely not.
things in, which I think scares some people, isn't it?
It
You know, you
does.
think
It does.
oh,
Yes.
hypnotherapy, God, that's quite extreme. But
Yeah.
actually
It's
it is becoming now a really valuable tool in helping people to overcome all kinds of problems, which often are linked back to stress, anxiety, and overwhelm,
exactly.
as you focus on. Yeah.
And I think when people start to realize what it actually involves, that fear subsides, because
Yeah.
it's about positive suggestion, but it's about using their own words. It's not, it's not asking them to do anything specific. It's just asking them to think about themselves in a positive way. And obviously, during the session, when we're involved in the talk therapy side of it, it's very positive. So it is what it says on the tin: solution focused hypnotherapy. It's what would it look like? How would it feel if things were a little bit better? So what it encourages your brain to do is it starts to get your brain to investigate, actually, what would that change? Is that what I need to feel the way I want to feel? So with things like smoking, we are probably a little bit more direct because the smoking is just a one-off session. But for most sessions, it's that gradual realization that our brain is flexible, that our thoughts are flexible, that
Mm.
if we have got stuck in a habit, in a behavior that isn't beneficial to us, it isn't helping us, then we have the power to think about that and imagine what it would be like if we didn't do that behavior, or we did something slightly different. And then what the language pattern, the trance, does is it just allows the client chance to process it the way that they want. So I always say, we come up with actions, but I'm never going to follow up on the action, because all it is about investigating, actually, what do I want? We talk a lot about what we don't want,
Yeah.
but the brain gets a real wake up call when we start to think about what we do want.
Mhm. Mm.
And when we start to realize those, that anxiety, depression, anger response, once we've realized it, the power gets taken out of it a little bit, and we start to hopefully move towards not overreacting, because some of these things are worries about things that haven't happened, might never
Mhm.
happen. We've all been there, stressing about something that hasn't happened, and it's highly likely it's not going to, but that doesn't seem to stop our brain. But once we start to investigate that, it allows us to come up with solutions that are right for us. I'm
Mhm.
never going to give a solution. It's always the client who comes up with their own solution, usually something I would never have thought of in a million years. And that's brilliant because it's right for that person.
Yeah. And just kind of to put a real life example into this, um, last year I started to struggle a bit with driving, which is very
Yeah,
common
which is
in
very
women in
common. Very
midlife, in
common. Yes.
perimenopause, is
Yeah.
our brain is experiencing those changes from our
Yeah.
hormones, and yeah, that rational part of your brain shifts. And I had a few real challenges with driving on dual carriageways, on motorways, and so on. And everything you've spoke about is kind of what I do in my coaching as well. You know, there's so many different ways
Yeah.
that you are helping people to, like you say, instead of being stuck with what the problem is, getting clear about where they want to get to and why
Yeah.
that's important and how that would feel and so on. And then you're guiding them to take their own journey to get there.
Yeah.
And hypnotherapy is a different way of doing that. So I knew how to coach myself, but of course that doesn't work, you know, especially when it's
It's always
something like that.
tricky.
But yeah, that deep-rooted fear. And so someone I know who was training to be a rapid transformation therapist with hypnotherapy asked if she could work with me to do some practice and get a testimonial. So I was like, yes, actually, I have this problem that I'm trying to solve on my own. And so I used it for the driving. And as you've explained there, Jill, you know, the power of the habits, which our thoughts are habits as well, when
Yeah.
it's formed and we don't want it to be there, but our brain thinks that's helping us to
Yeah.
survive. So it's bringing that thought in. And as much as I'm trying to rationalize and go, no, this is fine, you're in control, you're safe, you're driving the car, it's so powerful. And then when you go through something like what you do with hypnotherapy, it's flipping it the other way, isn't it? That once you've got those positive thoughts there and they're planted now as the new habit and thought pattern in your brain, they come into play, and then that builds and builds and strengthens more as that's put into action over time. And so for me, it did work very well. And the driving is an example that I think probably is relevant to it, because I hear a lot of women
It is
start
very
struggling with
common.
that. Mm-hmm.
And what it is I talk about the stress bucket a lot. So, which is really the hippocampus in our emotional brain. But if you think about everything that we worry about during the day, you know, all of the things that we have to do, we've all got busy lives, and all of these things go into our stress bucket. And if that stress bucket is really full, I mean, sometimes I talk about the fact that it's not just full, it's overflowing and it's floated off down the river. If we are in that situation, if things are happening from all directions, we've got busy home life, busy work life, you know, then put something in like menopause. So, you know, a hormonal change where we feel different. What that does is that promotes that danger response. Okay. And that danger response is really quickly. It happens really quickly. So our anxiety levels go up, intellectual control drops down. Now, when intellectual control drops down, it's our brain trying to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
And our brain is frantically searching for the point of danger. And in a lot of cases, driving gets the blame. So, you know, something might happen, somebody, you know, might cut you off at a turn off, and all of a sudden the brain goes, oh, I've been feeling really anxious, I've been feeling really worried. It's because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we latch on to something. So, you know, sometimes it's flying, sometimes it's driving, other times it could be social situations, but the brain kind of catches
Mm-hmm.
on to that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about trying to get that stress bucket down a little bit, because when that stress bucket is overflowing, we are down there in that not intellectual brain. We can't. We're trying frantically to come up with a solution to fix the problem, but we can't. If we can get that stress bucket under control, which is about sleeping properly, which is a huge part of this. Sleeping properly, because that's our brain's processing time, and also minimizing what goes in the stress bucket. So, trying to look, I call it the 3 Ps: positive thought, positive action, positive interaction. You know, who are the people who lift you up? What are the things, you know, like me going out for a walk? That's my positive action. I know it's going to make me feel good. And positive thought, visualizing what would happen if this went well. Okay. Serotonin,
Mm-hmm.
those beneficial neurotransmitters are coursing through me, and I'm already helping myself just by visualizing something going well. So once we do that, that serotonin, all of those beneficial neurotransmitters, they lift us up out of that fight, flight, or fright response and into our intellectual brain, where we can work out what we need to do in the car to keep us safe. But try, it's that habit, once that thought is there, it takes a little bit of working through, just so that you can get into that intellectual brain and go, it's not the driving that is causing me to feel like this, it's something else, and now I've got that under control. The driving doesn't seem so scary. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah.
yeah, it does. Absolutely. And I think for someone who might not have heard about, the brain and the subconscious part of
Yeah.
your brain and so on, picturing it like an iceberg really helps, doesn't it? In
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
how most of the iceberg is beneath the water, and
Yeah.
that's our brain, and that's why your brain is so powerful, because
Yeah.
you have up to 97% of everything you think and do every day coming from that subconscious part
Yeah.
of your brain. And so that's how, then, as you say, when you're in working with people in that trance state, you in that massive and hugely important piece of the brain that
Yeah.
runs the majority of the show for us every day. And I love you do work with kids as well, and
I do.
how you explain to them, and how much they get this, and how important, we've been chatting on and off
Absolutely.
and saying it's just so important, isn't it, to help people know this, because we don't understand about our emotions and how to
Mm.
regulate them, and, as you say, the role that stress is playing on
Yeah.
everything. We just think the thing is the thing, but it's never the thing. It's always
Yeah.
linked to something else. So yeah,
It's
so
always so much more complicated.
but so then with kids, how do you explain it, and what resonates with them that shifts some of the challenges? Obviously, a lot of children now have, sadly, anxiety and struggle with
They
their
do.
self-confidence, don't they?
And I think with children, I mean, they absolutely get the brain. I mean, they love that idea of that thinking brain and that emotional brain. And they'll use examples like, oh, well, when I'm playing football and I get tackled, I go down into my emotional brain because I get cross and I get angry. But actually, if I want to score a goal, I'm going to have to get back into my thinking brain really quickly. So, they can visualize that really well. But I think the main thing that really is a game changer for them is that it is completely natural to go into that emotional brain. We go into that emotional brain for a very good reason. And that's because that's our brain's way of checking, is this situation safe or not?
Mm-hmm.
So, I talk about, I mean, if we think about anxiety, depression, anger. So sometimes, I mean, we talk to children a lot about, I've got a poorly tummy, or they'll come to us and they'll say, my finger hurts. And it's not their finger. You know that the tummy is a sign of anxiety, but they often haven't got the words to explain, and sometimes they don't even know why they feel that way. They just do. So understanding that it's okay to feel anxious, to feel nervous, that is completely normal.
Yeah.
And I talk to them about, what adrenaline and cortisol do, how they're good for short doses, because, if you've got to stand up, and say your part in the play, you need a little burst of adrenaline to get the courage to do it. But we don't want adrenaline coursing through us every minute of every day. Sometimes, we go down the depression route, which I don't mean depression as in, depression. I mean in that hideaway So sometimes we just need a little bit of quiet time. We just need a little bit of quiet time to pull ourselves together, to get our energy back, and then we're back out there. What we don't want to do is stay in that quiet time hideaway. Yeah, that's not good long term. The anger one, anger, frustration. I mean, frustration's a big one, because if you can't do something or you can't do it as well as you particularly want to, it can be frustrating. So I talk about what's happening when they have that anger response. Sometimes they're not really angry at the person who they're directing their anger at. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it's inside that they're feeling the anger, but they don't know how to express it. So once they start to understand that actually it's 100% normal to feel nervous, we just don't want to feel nervous 100% of the time. That's when it turns into anxiety. So words are really important, the language we use. I always talk about it as, oh, is your emotional brain doing a bit of a check-in with you? Is it doing a bit of a check-in to see if things are safe? Did you get that feeling in your tummy? Did you get a bit of a headache? Did your shoulders get a bit tight? How does your check-in feel? And all of a sudden they go, oh, so it's okay to feel like that. Yes, as long as we don't feel like that all of the time. So it's about actually accepting that, because I think sometimes, we talk about anxiety. We can't be, hysterically laughing, all of the time. That would be exhausting as well. So it's about understanding that we go up, we go down, but we go back up again. And sometimes we're quite steady. Sometimes we have an up, sometimes we have a dip. And it's about them understanding that that's okay. And once they start to think about the 3 Ps, so the things that make them feel good, that give them that little burst of serotonin, then what happens is they see more of that. And I say, oh, well, if that made you feel good, could you do that more? Oh, yeah, I could. Yes, I could. Or they'll say, I let my sister, play with my, cars, or I let my brother listen to my music, and all of a sudden it's like, and did that make you feel good? Yes, it did. So could you do that a little bit more? Oh, maybe, yeah. And they start to focus in on the positives. Their stress bucket goes down a little bit, and all of a sudden the things that they were finding frustrating now seem a little bit more manageable, because they're like, oh, actually, if I went to bed a little bit earlier and had more sleep, I wouldn't be tired in the morning, and therefore I wouldn't argue with my brother at breakfast. Or I might be able to get my uniform on for school in time to leave, So as soon as you make them laugh, as soon as you get the serotonin going, as soon as you get the little smile, okay, right, we're in the intellectual brain, and then they start to come up with their own solutions, which are always, absolutely amazing. When they start to come up with, the little actions that they could take to make themselves feel better.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, how powerful is that, teaching our kids that at a young age? Because we don't know this as adults, and that's why I started the podcast opening the way I did, in that this is probably going to intrigue you because it's hypnotherapy, but also in that it's something we're not very familiar with in terms of it helping our health. And this is because it's helping us to run our brain, for our brain to run our thoughts in a more helpful, supportive way, which in turn then reduces our stress and makes that stress bucket less full. And all of that then has that knock-on effect of helping us to be more resilient, because when we're less stressed, and a stress does come our way, which is life, and stresses are daily in all kinds of shapes and sizes, we're able to handle those. And I think to know that from a young age,
yeah,
it's just setting you up for life, isn't
yeah,
it? And there's so
yeah.
much. I've spoken about this in relation to different things with our children, in that, you know, we need to share so much more with them from a young age
Mm.
about their health, their well-being, how their brains work, their emotions,
Yeah.
the impact of the things that they're feeling and saying to themselves. And it's all really about self-acceptance and awareness, isn't it? I think, like, having that
Well, it
curiosity, well, why do I
absolutely
feel this
is.
way? And that's okay to be like
Yeah,
that. But then, you know, I'm like this here. And
yeah. And that's the thing, it's about understanding that those anxiety type behaviors, those depression type behaviors, those anger type behaviors, they're all normal. They're all normal. We all do them. We
yeah.
might present with them in different ways, but we all do them. And once children, and I mean, I always do my initial consultation with the adults as well, because I think it's really important that, when I see a child, I see the parent as well, because they need to understand how to help them. So when they're talking about their 3Ps, the adult, knows what they're talking about. But it's that picture of, if you're imagining your own stress bucket and it's got the tiniest little bit in the bottom, then you are ready for anything. Even if something doesn't go quite according to plan, you've got the capacity, you've got the energy in the tank to have a go and deal with it. But if that stress bucket is so full that you haven't got any choice but to be in your emotional brain, it's about understanding that that's actually not going to work. We haven't got the capacity for the day. And once we start to realize the importance of sleep, which is huge,
Mm-hmm.
kind of that REM sleep, that processing time, once we get that, along with, kind of focusing on the positives. I'm not talking about, everything has to be great. We cut life doesn't work like that. We need children to be able to cope with things when they go wrong. We talk a lot about resilience. I mean, I've been a teacher for the last 30 years, therapist now, and we talk about resilience a lot. Resilience is about coping when things
Mm-hmm.
don't go according to plan. And life often doesn't go according to plan. But if we've got capacity, if we've got room in the stress bucket, then we can cope. We can cope much better with what comes along. Whereas if we're overwhelmed and don't understand those feelings, because, that drop into the emotional brain, it's scary. It's scary, but it's meant to be. But once we understand what it's doing, once we rephrase it as a check-in of, am I safe? It's that immediate, oh, right, okay, I'm back into my intellectual brain. I can actually look at this situation. He didn't mean to tackle me. It was just part of the football game. It wasn't a personal insult to me. He just wanted the ball. Is much better than he tackled me and I'm going to blow up like a volcano. So it's about understanding how we react, getting
Yeah.
gradually a little bit more and more control.
Mm. And a couple of things came to mind as you were explaining that, Jill. One is, when the parents are there, this is, as you say, it's giving them thoughts, probably for the first time, about their own thoughts and feelings,
Yes.
emotions, and responses, and so on. And the other is then, when children are learning this and putting these new habits into place, in those three
Yeah.
P's you talked about, and in repeating that becomes then a habit that is
Yeah.
formed. And that, like I said, that's the power of the brain, when you are
Yeah.
repeating the same actions, and that includes thoughts as well as practically doing something,
Yeah.
that becomes a part of your brain naturally. And so those children are going to grow up just
Yeah.
being those humans who are more self-aware
Yeah.
and understand what's going on. And the other thing I was thinking about, and this is a whole other conversation, but just in relation to, maybe, people might be thinking, oh, kids, why do kids need this? And and so on. We are seeing behavioural changes in kids. I bet in 30 years you've seen a massive shift in how kids are. Our diet is a big piece of it. We respond differently because of the poor nutrition that we have. A lot of kids are on screens much of the time, which brings all kinds of things into their brain and life, and maybe affecting their sleep even from a young age. And so we're also, just as a society, in a world where everything's instant and we expect someone to do what we want to do, or get what we want. And so there's lots of things that's meaning maybe children and adults are responding differently, but obviously young kids are growing up with that just being their normal world. They're learning that because it's around them. Whereas, I think when we were children, it was very different how it is now. I'm sure we did experience anxiety and other responses, but I think it's more common and exaggerated now, isn't it? Because of just how our modern lives and society are.
I think it is. And I mean, I think, whatever, whatever society, whether it's, growing up in the, 70s, 80s, 90s now, there's always going to be influence. There's always going to be life going on around us. And, and I think, obviously, a lot of the children, that we're working with now, have been through the 2 years of COVID as well, which, has made mental health and anxiety something that's talked about a lot. And I think that's where sometimes, it's been really good to talk about the fact that nervous is normal. That anxious feeling doesn't mean, oh wow, you now have anxiety and you're going to have it for the rest of your life. That anxious feeling is just your body saying, check everything's safe. And I think that's really good because it takes that fear out of it for them, because they're like, oh, well, I do feel anxious. I do feel worried. Well, actually, if there's things going on around you that are new, then new, comes across as danger. Change comes across as danger. But it's okay. We can just work out what's happening, make sure you're safe, and things move on. So we go in and out of that anxious feeling. That's okay. But it's about, kind of really helping children and adults to work out, actually, have I just got into a thought pattern that's actually just re-establishing something that sometimes isn't even happening? Sometimes it's but what if it did, kind of thought pattern. And that's a really tricky one. And we do get into habits. I mean, that's how humans are made. Learned habits and behaviors, are in our hippocampus, and they're there. We all do things that we know probably aren't the best choice, but it's become a habit, and we just keep going. And sometimes just asking ourselves, oh, why do I do that? Is all it takes to break that thought cycle. All of a sudden, you put what I call a little breaker in there of, why? Why am I doing that? Am I just doing it because my emotional brain's saying, you did it yesterday, you did it the day before, and we're still alive, so keep doing it again?
Yeah.
And it's just putting in that little question, that little why question. And sometimes, that's all it takes to start, the little dominoes falling towards what we actually thinking, is it what I actually do want? Yeah.
Yeah, the brain, it's so fascinating, isn't it? Because as you said there, and we've touched on, I think, a few times, it's doing it to survive. That is how we are built as humans. But it can become something that is really, hindering our happiness and possibly affecting our health and well-being in different ways.
Exactly.
So it's just, it's like two polar opposites, isn't it? It's kind of like it's there for the benefit of survival and to live and reproduce and so on. But then the flip side, because especially of how our lives have evolved in the modern world, it means that it can actually really mean that we're struggling to cope with life. And I think for someone
And that's
listening
the
and
thing. I mean, if you, yeah. The emotional brain, you know, our brain was designed for a completely different world to the one we're living in now.
Yeah.
You know, so what happens is things happen in our life, you know, like an email pinging into your inbox, and we react to it as if it's a polar bear.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we don't really come across that many polar bears in life. So, you know, it's about understanding that that's just the brain's way of working, and it's being able to keep yourself in that kind of thinking brain long enough to go, is it as dangerous as it felt there? If it is, I mean, we never want this feeling to go away, because if it is dangerous, then we do need to deal with it. But what we don't need it to do is overreact.
Yeah.
So, you know, me knocking the cup of tea over on the kitchen bench this morning was a pain, and I had to clean it up, but it wasn't a polar bear. You know, it wasn't going to eat me. So it's understanding that. So it's getting to the point where something happens, you can react, but you can quickly get yourself back on track. And that's what I see as resilience, is the ability to go, okay, it wasn't a polar bear, it was just a cup of tea, clean it up, all good. So
So that brings us really nicely to kind of wrap up with 3 simple steps somebody could take to build a habit around that. And that example is something that, whether it's a cup of tea, or you forgot to put petrol in the car, or the kids left the gym bag at home, whatever it might be, something, you know, more catastrophic maybe. Yeah, to have that resilience and ability to cope and step into that logical thinking part of your brain, what would be 3 steps someone could try to implement themselves?
Okay, so my first one would definitely be take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and just give yourself a little pause, because that little pause can mean the world. So, big deep breath of, I'm okay. How do I deal with it? And what that does is that just gets the heart rate down, gives you a little chance to think. My other one would be, do things in your day for the sole purpose of they make you feel good. So if it's giving someone a hug, calling a friend, making yourself one really, really good cup of coffee, whatever it is, do something every day that is for the sole purpose of, it makes me feel good, I'm worth it. And the third one is, understand that rest is when your brain is working its hardest. So never think that you shouldn't rest, because that's when your brain starts to work. I always say, body rests, brain kicks in. So rest is important because it keeps your brain working the way it should.
Oh, what brilliant steps to take. And they're all quite simple, essentially, aren't they? It's remembering to do them and implement them. But as we say, repetitiveness, consistency is key.
It is.
And we've spoke about rest a couple of times previously on episodes dedicated to the topic, because as you say, rest isn't about doing nothing. It's pausing, maybe physically, or trying to pause mentally. But we are so active in how our body and mind are functioning when we're resting, and we need that balance, don't we? So that's a really great tip to give. I love those. So thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to pop everything about Jill into the show notes. But if you want to let people know where they can find out more about the work you do, and obviously you're located here in the Northeast next to me, but you work virtually as well, don't you?
I am.
Yeah. So where can people check out more?
So I do online sessions. Yeah, I do online sessions, and I do in person in the Newcastle upon Tyne area. I am inspired to change Newcastle, so pop that in Google and you will get straight to my website, and I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn as Jill Whitehouse as well. So it would be lovely to get in touch with anyone who wants to find out more.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
thank you,
And have a
Nicola, for
chat.
that lovely
Yeah.
conversation. That was great.
You're welcome. It's been great.
That was
And yeah,
brilliant.
definitely reach out to Jill if there is anything that you're just curious about, because often this starts with a specific problem, but then you're going to get so much more from it in terms of how
Yeah,
you go about the rest of your life. Like my example with driving, it was about the driving,
absolutely.
but it affects
Yeah.
everything. So yeah, thank you. That was brilliant, Jill.
Thank you very much, Nicola.